Hello and welcome to the AV Forums podcast, streaming live on Tuesday, the 21st of July. And joining me on this edition, Steve Withers.
Good evening, everyone.
Ed Selley.
Hello.
Philip Jones.
How's everybody?
Oliver Kriete.
Hello, everybody.
And Roger Batchelor.
Good evening, all.
And welcome along to everybody that has been waiting for us to start this evening. Thank you very much. There's lots of you out there. We've got the questions coming through already, which is great to see. And once again, we are streaming live, but don't forget, if you are not able to join us for the live stream, you can listen to this at any point once the podcast finishes tonight. It'll be live on YouTube, and also the audio version will be available for you on iTunes and Spotify or any other podcast provider that you use. We are going to have a Q&A this evening. We're going to leave the Q&A to a little bit further on because there are some presentations to be done, brief presentations. We're going to talk about some new product and so on. And yes, this is a Denon and Sound United special this evening. This is why we're coming out on a Tuesday evening and not on a Sunday night, so we can get as many people on the call as possible. So to introduce themselves, I'm going to go to Roger Batchelor first. Roger, I've known you about 15, maybe even 18 years, a long time. I think the first time we met, and it's a good little story, this was probably 2006. So we'd been communicating email, you've been sending me review samples and so on, but the first time we actually met was 2006 at Hammersmith Hi-Fi show, home entertainment show, which was quite some time ago. And incidentally, that was the first time I ever met Ed, was at that show as well. Don't know if Ed remembers that or not.
I was at a trade show, so I spent as little time as possible paying attention or sober. So,
well, I interviewed you for the podcast, so you should know. Yes, we did podcasts all the way back then. So, Roger, for people who don't know who you are, maybe you can explain what your role is and what you do.
Yeah, as briefly as possible. Yes, I've been associated with Denon now for 29 years. Started off as the training officer for the UK, touring around the dealers, having previously worked in a store that sold Denon Hi-Fi. So I go back in the 1980s. So go back a long way with Denon. But yes, of course, over the years we did many of those kind of shows where you and I met, Phil, and demonstrations with all the new kit coming out. And I think we're all lucky, aren't we, to work in an industry where we get to play with all this fantastic kit on a daily basis, which is absolutely brilliant. So yes, I've been, my role nowadays is still very much product marketing, arranging review samples for you guys, and doing trade shows and all that kind of stuff. And of course, working with the team in Europe with Oliver when the new products are coming out and so on and so forth. So yeah.
Well, good to see you again, Roger. Welcome along to the podcast. Next, Philip Jones. Philip, tell us about yourself.
Okay. So my name's Philip Jones. I am the Director of Product Technology for Sound United. So I get to play with all of the great products that we build. So for example, I have one of the first Denon 6700s in my room. I got in my house, I got to kind of sneak it out to play with it. So my job is to travel around and explain the cool technologies we have built into our products. So I get to hang out with enthusiasts and engineers, and I get to play with stuff for free. So how can I complain about my job?
Excellent. And finally, Oliver, tell us about yourself, Oliver.
Hello, Phil. Hello. Oliver Kriete is my name, and I'm the European Product Manager. And in this role, I'm actually the connection between the European market and our Japanese engineering team. And I'm trying to get you the best products for the European market. Of course, I still have to fight a bit with Phil from time to time to get not only US-driven products, but I'm hard fighting for you guys here on the EU market to get the best stuff ever. I'm with the company already for not 29 years, but actually 24 years now, Roger. You still are 5 years ahead to me. I started off with Marantz as a product manager in Germany, so I'm German. And over the years, I climbed up the ladder to the European role. And I'm pretty happy to be here tonight with you guys to get a chance to talk about our new products lineup, what makes the two brands special, because Phil, I have to correct you. You mentioned you're talking about Denon tonight, but actually we're also talking a bit about Marantz, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was going to come on to next. Is maybe we need to do just a brief history of the companies. People will know Denon and Marantz, now under the Sound United brand or umbrella. So maybe tell us a little bit about both brands, where they started, and like a brief potted history, and then where we are now.
Yeah, very, very briefly on the history. Let's say Denon is the oldest brand actually in our industry here. We will turn 110 years this year. So we have a nice celebration to do in October, because actually the company started on the 1st of October. Japanese based right from the beginning, while Marantz on the other side is founded in 1963. So we are now about 65 years and a bit in age. But it was actually founded in the US at that time from Selley B. Marantz. But over the years, it also moved to Japan, where our engineering department is located and production is located and so on. And talking about the merge of Denon and Marantz, if you think about it, it's already nearly 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it was in 2002, a long time ago, it was decided to bring these two powerful brands together and join forces. And that's at that time was under D&M. Today it's under the Sound United umbrella. And the good thing is that we, in this powerful combination, of course, we have a nice size to get always easy access to the latest technologies. We are always very close in cooperation with Dolby and DTS, but also with companies like Oro, where we have the Oro 3D technology, or DTS IMAX, DTS X Pro, like Phil is going to explain us later on. We also included. So by having this power, we always have access to the latest technologies. And in addition to the latest technologies, when it comes to audio codecs, of course, we also have the access to HDMI, all the video stuff. And that makes it possible for us to enter the market with HDMI 2.1 at first. So we are the first to market. First is Denon. Marantz has to wait a month longer to come to market, but we are out there now as well.
Now, one of the things that always comes up on the forums, Oliver, is somebody will ask a question about either a Denon or Marantz model, normally a Denon model, and somebody will pipe in, we'll just buy the Marantz, it's cheaper, and it's the same thing. They're not the same, are they? Denon and Marantz, they are different.
Absolutely not. I have a nice picture actually for you to explain that a bit. And if you have a look to this picture, you will see in the center, I'm also going to describe it because not everybody can see it here, because you're also listening to the podcast. So in the center, you see a big square where all the technologies are in, like I just described, with audio codecs, with video stuff, and so on. And but what is left and right shown on this picture actually is that we have dedicated sound managers. Because what is the real differentiation? First of all, cosmetic. Okay, it's still, let's say, a kind of black box. However, slight differentiation in the design approach, of course. But what's much more important is that we have completely separated audio development departments. So that means we have our own sound identity per brand. So we have Denon sound managers and we have Marantz sound managers. You can see on the Denon side is Yuki Takahashi, and on the other side it's Yoshinori Ogata. So by keeping this completely separated. Yeah, Phil, you want to add something?
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. Is we hear about, think of us like the Volkswagen Group. Volkswagen owns multiple brands: Volkswagen, Bentley, Porsche, Lamborghini, all that stuff. They work hard to keep the brands separate. That's the goal. Keep the brands separate. There's certain things a car has to do. You got to have airbags. You got to have navigation, right? Those things do not determine the characteristic of a brand. It's just stuff that you would expect. You want the remote control to work. You want the video switching to work. But then that allows the engineering teams to build, to focus on the things that make a Denon and a Marantz. Marantz has more parts in it than a Denon because of things such as HDAM. Marantz parts can cost more. Like a Toronto power supply can cost 3 times more than an L-core power supply. So you're getting more parts, more better, higher quality parts or more expensive parts, and a different recipe. So while you may look at the box and see 150 watts and 150 watts, we have to go beyond that. They only share about 57% of the components inside of the boxes are shared, but that stuff is video switching and IC chips. Everything that makes it sound like a Marantz is different than what makes it sound like a Denon. So we really want to stress those points. They're not the same. Okay.
Yeah. When it comes to feature, yes, but the sound quality itself, you can't really check on the specification list. So exactly. That's where we put a lot of effort. So first of all, of course, on the engineering side, separate audio engineering. Then the sound master are completely independent. So one is taking care of Marantz, the other one of Denon. And we here in Europe also play quite an important role when it comes to maintaining the brand philosophy when it comes to sound, because we are working very closely with the sound engineers in Japan. Every product they're going to tweak and tune according to Marantz or Denon standards will be sent over to Europe. So we have, I also have two nice pictures here. One is the listening room, which we have in Chiracabo, and the other picture is showing our Eindhoven listening room. And where you can see nicely where we are working with the engineering team, with the sound engineers here in our Eindhoven listening room to do the final tweaking on the products. And we do it very consistent every year on year. So we really pay a lot of time and attention to this difference in sound quality. And where you can define Denon as a more powerful, very clean, very lively sound, the Marantz one is the more musical one, more slightly laid back, more a kind of relaxed type, but not missing any note, not missing any detail. But the tonal balance is slightly different, and also the overall presentation is different when it comes to Marantz in comparison to Denon. Denon is more forward, more into your face. It's more, let's say, it's a manufactured sound, while Marantz is a more laid back, more, let's say, playing behind the speakers with a very wide open sound stage. It's more kind of handcrafted. Yeah, so it's pretty nice, nice differentiation we have and maintain.
Yeah. It's almost like if you go to, there's kind of that really precise to the point studio sound, and then there's that warm musical sound that you hear from vinyl and things like that. Neither one is wrong. It's just which one do you prefer? And if you look at our two brands, we have very big fan bases for both the Denon and the Marantz sound. Just like Audi is precise and to the point. Porsche is get there with a little bit of style and a little bit of panache. They both have their own fans, and our goal is to provide our fans with the sound that they are accustomed to getting.
Yeah. Exactly.
Indeed. I think the thing that amazes me is that year on year, the engineers and the team seem to be able to improve the sound quality. Mm-hmm. You think, well, how can we get any better than this? And then next year they do actually achieve another step up.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah, the great thing is, Roger, we do is that we actually triple down what we learned from the top class product. Year on year, it will triple down into the smaller, lower price products as well. So by that, so we learn on the top flagship models, and we bring down the knowledge then to the other models year after year. That's why you can experience that actually it's always getting a bit better. It's not a revolution, but it's an evolution we do. Yeah, always step by step, as Japanese say, ippo ippo.
So is it deliberate then that you go for certain sound signatures with Marantz and Denon products? Would you say Denon's more neutral towards the material that's playing back, or do both of them have sound signatures to them?
I would say they both have their own signature, but I would actually, Oliver, what do you think? How would you explain?
Oh yeah,
you do it all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. We work with both brands here in Eindhoven. I'm responsible for both brands, but I started with Marantz, so I always have my Marantz hat on. Yeah. I love the warm touch of the Marantz. Yeah, but I also appreciate the energy and the clarity a Denon can deliver, especially on cinema movies. Yeah. Exactly. So it's as Phil said, there's nothing wrong with one or the other. Yeah. It's just a different tone to it, different balance. Yeah.
So one of the demos that we do here in the US, and we've done it a couple of times, is we will take a comparable Marantz and a comparable Denon. When you look at the specs on the box, they're the same, and we will set them both up in the same room. We will buy two pairs of the same identical pairs of speakers, and we will play the same song on both, and we quickly switch between the two. Everything's level matched. It's the same speakers at this and when I switch back and forth, there's a difference, okay? And then you just pick the one that you're passionate about, and that's all we're trying to do with this. But the main thing we want to get across is you get the sound that you like with the reliability of having Denon and Marantz together, leveraging the stuff that normally is going to fail in your receiver, like your HDMI or your control system, because a lot of times small boutique companies are really good at making amplification. But the things such as video switching and stuff like that, they're not very good at. And that's the part. A lot of times high performance vehicles have low reliability because it's not about the motor. It's about the electrical system is falling apart. So by having the bigger engineering team backing both brands, we can give you high performance and reliability. I can
vouch for that. I had the X7200 for 3 years, and I don't think it put a foot wrong.
Exactly.
In that entire 3-year period, not once did it have any kind of bug or anything annoying about it. It's incredible.
We kept it upgraded as well.
Yeah, I know that was the best thing about it. Is it kept it at the top of the range for about 3 years.
Exactly. And that's another reason.
I was going to say you added things that you didn't even promise to add. I think initially you didn't say it was going to pass Dolby Vision, but then you added Dolby Vision pass through. So you under-promised and over-delivered, which is always the best approach.
Yeah.
So actually, that's a good point, because we get asked a lot on certain things. Why do you do firmware update? Why will you add new features to older products? The Denon and Marantz teams are dedicated to doing that when they can, but sometimes there's limitations to processing or physical hardware that will prevent us from doing that. And the example of what you just brought up of us adding Dolby Vision to your to your receiver shows that when we can, we really do try to. If sometimes there's new stuff like DTSX Pro requires a different processor, it needs a bigger brain. So I can't do that as a firmware update because I'm sorry, your receiver just isn't smart enough. So there's certain things like that we do. People ask, how come I can't have Bluetooth transmitter or Bluetooth headphone support on my 3-year-old Denon receiver? It's got to physically have a transmitter in it. So that can't be done as a firmware update. So we will update things whenever we possibly can, but certain things require new hardware, or the engineering effort just makes it cost prohibitive. Now, one thing that's nice about us is we are always the first with everything. When you look at any of the surround sound formats, Aural 3D, Dolby Atmos, DTS-X, IMAX Enhanced, we're always the first. And this year we're the first receivers to launch DTS-X Pro. There are a few super high-end processors like from Trenoff that support DTS-X Pro, but they're the price of a small BMW. Now you can get that type of processing and 13 channels of processing in DTS on receivers that start at about $2,500 US. So that's an example of that, leveraging that engineering power to be the first to offer, and the other thing, HDMI 2.1 capabilities. We were the first to do that because of our size and the ability for us to leverage all that engineering might.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look what is actually all inside such an AV receiver, you wonder how you can make it for such a small amount of money.
Yeah, I've often wondered that.
It's amazing what our engineering team always managed to get out of, let's say, a fixed budget. And I'm always surprised how they can make it. Yeah, but that's again, it's a synergy we also have. Smaller companies, easily the product would cost double the price if they have the same feature set with all the technology, if they can get access to it at all.
Yeah.
So that's really the strength of Denon and Marantz and the.
So you've been talking about the box size there, and it's one thing that the product lines used to be very similar between Denon and Marantz. You used to have AV receivers, used to have processors, and then power amps. But I noticed that has disappeared now from Denon. Denon is AV amplifiers and receivers only, and you've kept the AV processor and AV separates with Marantz. What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, that actually was a kind of decision made to differentiate the brands also from the product strategy. As you just mentioned with Denon, we are mainly on AV receiver / AV amplifier because with the latest products launch, we kicked out FM tuner on some of the models, so they're pure AV amplifiers. Of course, they still have network and internet radio access, so that's all covered. But it's mainly, let's say, standard AV stuff. While for Marantz, we took the different route and also differentiated for the entry models, let's say the beginning into the AV, that will be slim line receivers, so just half of a height of a normal receiver, so it fits nicely in every living room, but still delivering the nice Marantz performance. Then we have also a lineup of AV receivers, AV amplifiers, and for the top class, we have the AV separates. By that, we can have a nice differentiation also to Denon, and we can serve different markets, different customers.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a crossover. If you look at Audi and Porsche, they cross over at certain parts, but eventually, at the very top, Porsche starts to walk away a little bit. So there's a 11-channel Denon. Then they made they looked at it and made an 11-channel Marantz. More parts, premium parts means a higher price point. Then they built the king of receivers, the AV, the X8500. It's it's 4400 US. And they looked at it and said, by the time we built a Marantz level receiver with all the parts we wanted to do, why don't we that's a separates customer.
Yeah.
You know, so they went to the separate side. So if you looking for the ultimate 13-channel, monster of an AVR, that's where the Denon lives. And then beyond that, it's separates time, and that's where, and then you jump into the Marantz product lineup as separate. So there's a reason. The goal is to try to find a place for everything, and to try to meet a variety of different customers' needs. And after you get past about $5,000 US, you're in the separate. So let Marantz handle the separate part of the business.
Right. So let's talk about the new models then that you have coming up. And once we've done that, we can then deep dive into some of the technology that's on there, because there's some really interesting technologies coming this year. Okay.
So for those who are watching, I actually have like a little slide here that I can bring up. So if you make me large, so basically for Denon, we are launching 4 models: the 27, 37, 47, and 6700. And as you move up the lineup, of course, the main thing is you get more surround sound processing, more built-in amplification, a more robust power supply, which means you get more power, more wattage per channel. And then we start adding, for example, more video inputs, and as well as a more powerful version of our room compensation, such as Odyssey. So as you move up the lineup, we start to add things. So when you go from a 27 to a 37, for example, we add IMAX Enhanced and we go to we add 2 more channels of amplification. When you go from a 37 to a 47, now we're adding Auro 3D, we're adding more power, we're adding more HDMI inputs, and then when you go up to the big guy, the 6700, we're adding DTS-X Pro, as well as more power and a bigger processor. And of course the X8500 is still in the lineup. It will continue. It will be upgraded to support DTS-X Pro as well. So, and we're going to offer 2 versions of that. Right now, if you purchase a X8500, it's going to be an X8500H, and it has a traditional HDMI 2.0, a standard HDMI 2.0B board in it. Eventually, we are going to be doing board upgrades for those customers who have bought 8500s, and at that time, you'll be able to purchase a X8500HA, which indicates that it has the HDMI 2.1 board built in. But the 8500 will continue in the lineup. So that's basically the roundup. But oh, by the way, there was a lot of features that we introduced on our older models last year, and that people wanted to know which that was included in these 2020 models. So these do have capabilities such as the Bluetooth headphone support, Dolby speaker virtualizer. It has the ability to do, like in my room, in my home, I could play surround sound in the main room and send a down mix to a second zone or my HEOS multi-zone speaker system. So all of those cool performance and convenience features we added in the models below 1600 US last year are now being incorporated into these receivers, and then some. There's 3 or 4 other notable features that we've added this year as well.
Okay, I think the hot potato, the one we need to talk about first of all, is HDMI 2.1.
Yes.
Lots of talk out there on forums all over the planet. It's just one of those hot potato subjects. You know, do you need it? Can you get what you need through 2.0? Why do you need 2.1 and so on? But obviously, we are going to move in the next few years towards 8K displays, whether we want them or not. It's just the way things are going to move forward. We're going to need 2.1, but maybe you could go in, dive deep a little bit into it, Philip, and tell us a little bit more about the technology.
So what ends up happening is every time before I was working at doing this job at Sound United, I was actually worked for another company that starts with an S and ends with a Y. I was the product technology manager, 4 letters, for that company, and so I have been dealing with this HDMI 2.1 thing for about 4 years. So let's talk about it. The goal is to give a person a better video experience, a better audio experience, a better gaming experience if you're a gamer, and just a better overall user experience. Most of those things do not require a new standard. However, the one that did drive to having a new standard is the whole video side of things. Because when I increase the size of the video, I increase the bandwidth requirements that are necessary that you need to do. So there's basically, we'll say 5 elements of video. There's resolution, frame rate, color depth, which is how many numbers I use to describe the colors, the brightness range, how many steps do I have from black to bright white, as well as color space. How big of a triangle of colors am I trying to describe? There's only basically 3 of these things that actually increase the size of the video. Of course, if video is just photos shown rapidly. So if I go from an 8 megapixel photo to a 33 megapixel photo for each frame, the video file is going to get massive. It's 4 times the amount of data. It's 4 times each picture is 4 times bigger. Now, the next thing is if I show video is just a whole bunch of photos shown to you rapidly. And if I go from 24 photos in a second to 30 photos in a second to 120 photos in a second, more photos per second means a bigger file. And lastly, color depth. The numbers that I use to describe the colors. Originally, we were using 8-bit color numbers to describe colors when it came to when we were talking about colors. And 8-bit gives you about 16 million numbers, which you would think would be a lot of numbers to describe all the colors in the rainbow, but it really isn't, especially as you add more brightness. I mean, how many shades of red do you need to describe Ferrari in the sunlight all the way down to Ferrari in the darkness? That red is a lot of different colors and a lot of different numbers. So when I go up just from 8 bits to 10 bits, I go from 16 million colors to 1 billion colors. And if I go from 10-bit to 12-bit, the colors jump even more, 68 billion colors. It's a tremendous amount of numbers. So you get, but the bigger the number, the more data that's required to do it. When it comes to this new standard, there's only 2 things they increased. And that was, we can't compare it to the old standard. And that was, now you have more resolution and you have more frame rate. And those are some of the things that require the most amount of bandwidth. So now I have to figure out a way to send way more data down a line. And of course, that is going to be more crucial because of these game systems that are coming out. Of course, Xbox and PlayStation have just announced that they're going to be delivering game systems with the theoretical ability to support 8K 60 and 4K 120. Right now, we've been talking to gamers, and it seems like the gamers are going to be far more interested in the higher frame rate. Higher frame rate gives you smoother, crisper motion. If you're playing a first-person shooter game or you're playing a sport game, you literally have a gaming advantage with those particular things. Now, just because the machine has this capability, it does not mean the gamers are going to utilize this. They may take that extra processing power and still just deliver 4K 60, but do better ray tracing. So each frame looks more like life. So it's up to the game developer on how they use this firepower. 8K 60, 4K 120, 4K 20 with better realistic images. So it's up to them. But these are basically the 2 sources right now that are going to tax your system and require the additional bandwidth. There are no movie solutions or video solutions for watching movies right now that have been announced. Most movie guys, I'm a movie guy, do not like ultra high frame rate movies. They prefer 24p, not because because it is like the way it looks. Every time a director, have you guys seen Gemini Man or
yeah,
or
I'm trying to
Billy
forget about it.
Yeah, it's a cool idea, but it doesn't look like a movie. So even if you look at it, if they do 8K, it's probably going to do 8K 24. To be honest with you, because most of the time they've already, if they do an 8K 60, all the idiots are gonna hate it. So gaming is pretty much where this is coming through. Now theoretically, we keep hearing this number 48, and I have been traveling and been on all over a whole bunch of different podcasts and things like that about this 48 number. The new signal, the new cable, the new way that we use, this is the same HDMI cable you had before, but how they utilize the inside of the cable is different, which is why you can't do a firmware update from HDMI 2.0B to HDMI 2.1, because the way your circuitry in your TV and the circuitry in your receiver and the circuitry in your game system physically looks at the wires in an HDMI cable is different, and you can't do have your devices look at that thing differently by doing a firmware update. It has to be a hardware update. But the theoretical limitation or maximum of this is 48. But we'll talk a little later about you really don't need 48. 48 is more for the future. There is no device available that you can actually utilize 48. So real quick, let me tell you how the cable works, and then we can talk about and then I could talk. We could as we're here. So
Phil, just a quick interruption here. So talking about 48, it's the bandwidth you're talking about. Yes, so not everybody is seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay,
so I think it's good to mention.
Okay, so let me go back because I'm so used to. If you have a current Apple TV, Roku, 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray. The bandwidth requirement to send all of the video of the maximum amount of the video quality from that current standard is 18 gigabits per second. That will give you 4K at 60 frames per second in HDR. Okay. Now, in order to send 8K at 60 frames per second in HDR or 4K at 120 frames per second in HDR, you need more bandwidth. So the standard has been increased from 18 gigabits per second to 48 gigabits per second. And the way that they did that was, if you have an HDMI cable, in that cable is about 19 little wires. Currently, right now, they only use 3 of the pairs inside of the cable to send the video signal. And each of the video pair can support 6 gigabits per second. So 6 plus 6 plus 6 equals 18. That's how they can pass 18 gigabits per second of video bandwidth. And those are passed on what are called TMDS pairs. You ain't gotta know that, but that's just the term of it. Now, while they are using 3 of them, there's actually 4 of them inside of the cable. So right now we're using 3. So 6 plus 6 plus 6. So what they said is, instead of using 3, there's this leftover one that was just being used for sync, to basically sync the three other lines together and make sure the timing is correct. Why don't we use that one as a 4th lane to run the bandwidth? So think of it going from a 3-lane highway to a 4-lane highway. So what they did is now they're utilizing that 4th lane, and now each lane can pass a total of 12. So not only did they increase the lanes of the highway, they sped up the traffic. So now it's 12 plus 12 plus 12. 12 plus 12 plus 12 plus 12 equals 48. So that's what they're doing. Now, but because your device is looking at the cable different, you cannot do a firmware update to achieve this. So we talk about that all the time. So we go from 3 lanes to now we are on 4 lanes. So that's kind of, and then, oh, and by the way, there's also a compression scheme that they can apply on this as well. It's called DSC. And if using that compression, this format should support up to 10K at 120 frames per second. So hopefully Phil and I will not be having this conversation again until he has a flying car, because I am sick of turning around every single time and there's a new HDMI standard. So this standard is designed to go way beyond what your current device could do.
And I think this is where the confusion comes, Philip, because this was designed for, I think at the time of development, it was said 20 years into the future. We want to cover as many bases as possible for the next 20 years rather than keep upgrading. And I think this is where the problem comes, because in today's society, we want everything right now. We want it all.
Exactly.
And I think this is where the confusion sometimes sets in. Now, there is an interesting question, because a lot of manufacturers this year on their TVs have gone from having HDMI 2.1 at 48 gigabits per second to 40 gigabits per second. What's the thinking behind that?
Okay, so like I said, remember I told you that the 48 was there to support via DSC compression frame rates up to 10K at 120 frames per second. The limitation is all TVs and all displays utilize a 10-bit panel. That's just the way it is. There's only a few prime manufacturers that make the panels, whether it's OLED or LCD, for every consumer TV and every display. Now, if I do the mathematics and I say, okay, I want to do 120 frames per second on a 10-bit panel with all the colors sampled all the time, the maximum that I can, how much data do I actually need? 40. Okay. If I want to do movies at in a movie, I call myself a vidiot because I love my movies the way the movie guy intended you to watch them. 24p, and if I want 8K at 24p at 10-bit, the maximum that TV can reproduce in colors, and every color represented every single time, the speed limit is 40. If I want to do 8K 60, there is no uncompressed version of that. You have to there is no uncompressed 444, which means the colors are sampled every single time. They have to use a little bit of reduced to chroma sampling, how often the colors are sampled. And the standard is 8K at 60 frames per second at 10 bits with a 420 color chroma sampling, which is the standard that is part of this thing. The maximum for a 10-bit panel is 40. So I could have gave you 48, which, and by the way, the chipsets are defined by a small group of people. So I could have did a one-off chipset for your TV to support 48. And it's like me telling your Volkswagen bus to go 500 miles an hour. It hears it, but it can't do anything with it. So them spending the money to give you that extra 8 gigabits of bandwidth would have substantially increased the cost of the display. And I think they would rather give you a better backlight system and a better video processing and a better chassis than a fancy number that looks good on paper. Okay. Now, the next thing that's kind of interesting is people go, well, what about the game system? Well, the game systems are, they also have to utilize the parts that are available to them. And the game systems, their HDMI on some of the game systems and many of the graphics cards that are coming can support 4 lanes at 10 gigabits per second. So the maximum the game system can output is, drum roll please, 40. So that means I can do my games at 4K 120 with 10-bit color, my game at 24p at 8K 24 at 10-bit color, or my game at 60p with 10-bit color. Now I can crank this up to 12-bit color, but I can't do 4K 120. Maybe I could do 4K 60 at 12-bit. But why would you do that when your TV can't display it? So a lot of these guys are getting LG, let's be honest, was the one that the first person that people discovered this, but it makes sense. I mean, if the TV does not support it and the game system and the current sources do not output it, would you rather have the manufacturer of the display that you're buying take that cost and apply it to something that you're going to get a benefit from the TV you have? So that's an important thing that we always want to stress. But a lot of times people don't go through these numbers, and there's only a few devices that can measure it. And as more and more reviewers measure these things, they'll start saying the speed limit is the maximum speed limit is 48. But right now, the current speed limit based on device limitations is 40.
Yeah, it is interesting stuff. I just got a Meridio 7 generator a few weeks ago.
Yep.
Absolutely brilliant for reading the EDID and actually seeing, what the HDMI inputs can take on this year's TVs. So yeah, it's interesting being able to measure that, see what manufacturers are doing with that. Now, when we come back to your products, your AV receivers this year, there is one HDMI 2.1 input. Is that 40 gigabits per second?
Yes, it's 40. So because now, like I said, we can make a one-off that could support 48. It probably would increase the price. You wouldn't be able to connect anything modern. And by the time there was something that was a 12-bit panel display, you'd probably be buying a new AVR. Okay, so 40 is, we want to give you the maximum performance from the devices you're going to be connecting it to. And that is a 10-bit paneled consumer TV or projector. So 40 is perfectly fine. One thing I do want to point out in our receivers, and this is important as you get into using our receivers for these HDMI 2.1 devices. In our receivers, we actually have a setting in our receivers that allow you to go in and change how the receiver looks at an HDMI cable. So if I go in here, and you'll see that I in my menu system, I have all these different settings. And under video, you'll see one that says 8K and 4K signal output format. What ends up happening is, before, you've always seen when you had a TV or a receiver, there's a way to set your video outputs for HDMI from standard to enhanced. The reason, a lot of times they used to default to standard to make it backwards compatible with older video devices, an older PlayStation, or maybe an older DVD player. And if you had a 4K 60p HDR device, you used to have to change the receiver and the TV's HDMI inputs to enhanced. This year on our receivers, they are already defaulted to enhanced because most people who are buying our receivers are connecting them to modern video sources, Roku's, Apple 4Ks, 4K Blu-ray players, and things like that. There's also a new setting called 8K signal format. Do not select this unless you have an 8K TV and an 8K, because what ends up happening is you're telling the receiver, instead of passing 3 lanes of traffic, pass 4 lanes of traffic. And if your TV only can read the old standard of HDMI 2.0B, it does not know what to do with 4 lanes of traffic. Does that make sense? So basically, if you do not have a brand new 2.1 source and a brand new 2.1 enabled TV, do not, I repeat, do not switch this to 8K to 8K.
So when you press it, Philip, does it say, "Are you sure?" And then when you press it again,
oh yeah,
are you absolutely sure?
It says, "Are you sure?" It says, "Make sure that your devices can support this." Now,
but Phil, there's a nice option now while you're talking about this, let's say, issue. We have a nice option in our setup menu to check what actually your TV screen can do.
Exactly.
So yeah, so maybe you can briefly touch on that one.
Yeah. So what happens is there's a lot of different features that are going to go way beyond just resolution, which we will probably tackle a little bit later, such as variable refresh rate. So a lot of times we get blamed if there's no picture, they always seem to blame the black box in the middle, the receiver. So what happens is our receivers, if you hit the info button, now you can go out and buy an Iridium 7G with, how much is that guy? $5,000 to test this stuff? Or I could hit the info button and it will, because the receiver is a repeater, it's between the source and the display, it can measure and see the capabilities of each of the display of the devices connected. So it can tell you if it can support what resolutions, what HDMI features it can support. All of that stuff can be displayed across the front of this thing. So it will tell you if you should hit that button before you hit the button. But hopefully if you're paying a premium for an 8K TV, you should know if it's an 8K TV. And your PlayStation 2 is not an HDMI 2.1 device, right? So you'll know when you should hit that button and when you should not. Okay, so that's something that we want to point. And for those people who have those test pattern generators, because I had a reviewer say they plugged it in and all they saw was 3 lanes of traffic, and that was because you had to switch it to 8K before you plugged in the analyzer in. So the receiver is now a 4-lane highway, so you get the proper reading on your device. So that's something that we want to point out. Very technical, but I do want to stress that is actually important.
One question that always comes up as well, Philip, I just want to cover this one quickly, is why is there only one HDMI 2.1 input?
So I asked a bunch of engineers about this from a lot of different companies. And basically the way it works is this. There's the board can either be 2 in and 1 out, or 1 in and 2 out. Okay. And we looked at it and said, as we get into HDMI cables, we could talk about this. The longest length that you can run HDMI 2.1 through a standard copper cable is about 2 meters. 2 meters. After that, you have to go to very expensive active copper, which will probably give you about 4 or 5 meters. And then you got to get into fiber optics, which costs several $100s. The average person who's buying this is gonna for the next few years is gonna be buying a game system. You plug the game system directly into the TV via a short HDMI 2.1, and then you feed the audio back via a regular HDMI cable that you already have. Saves you a bunch of money. If you plug the game system into the back of the TV, into the back of the receiver, now you have to buy 2 new HDMI cables, which are very expensive. And if one of those cables, the one that goes from the receiver to the TV, is longer than 2 or 3 meters, you're talking about a $200 investment. So I plug it into the TV for $35 US. I plug it into the back of the receiver for $200 or $535 US. So we looked at it. So the only person that's going to probably want to do that is someone who has an 8K TV and an 8K projector. And that's why we went that direction. Now, there are other HDMI features that are built into an HDMI board that we could talk about that you're going to be using constantly, that all of the inputs on the back and on the front support. Variable refresh rate, auto latency mode, all of those things are supported on all of the outputs. All of the inputs and all of the outputs. The only thing but there's only one 48 in and 2 48 outs. Now we could have done right now a 4 or 5 input HDMI 2.1 switcher costs at this time more than an X3700. I just want to point that out. So we could have gave you more inputs and it would have dramatically increased the price of the product for something you probably aren't going to use because it's cost prohibitive for all of the cables to make it happen.
Yeah, and you have to see it's not just for, let's say for the one user who is actually going to use it, but actually we have to add the cost for everybody who's going to buy the product. Yeah.
So that at
one point, we just have to find the balance, what really makes sense to keep the price attractive, but having the feature readiness.
Yeah. So let's talk about now. The one thing that I do want to stress too is we talk a lot about AK. So let's talk about who is going to be the customer for this. Are you a gamer? If you're not a gamer, the 8K conversation is done, because right now there's no Rokus, no Apple TVs, nothing that has been announced. So if you're not a gamer, we already have kind of eliminated it, right? Is the game you're playing in 8K 60 or 4K 120? That's the next one, all right? And if those aren't you, while these companies are really hyping and promoting the displays, because they always go to CES and show you their flagship TV. They do it all the time, but they don't show you that the majority of their lineup is not 8K. So there are other things that you may want to care about. There's other features to 2.1. Remember I said there's enhancements to video, enhancements to audio, enhancements to regular gaming, even if you do not have an 8K TV, and enhancements to the user interface. So there's a couple of things that you get that come along with HDMI 2.1. So let's talk about what these are, and these are kind of the things that people are going to care about. So the first thing that's going to come up is you're going to get what's called variable refresh rate. Variable refresh rate, the way this works is your TV and your computer or your game system talk to each other, and they communicate. We'll talk about how that happens. But let's go through. So I'll go through these in more detail. Variable refresh rate, quick frame transport, and auto latency mode. So variable refresh rate. A lot of times what ends up happening is your computer, unlike watching a movie, when you're playing a video game, the computer has to render each frame by frame by frame based on what you're doing on the screen. Sometimes that frame is really easy for it to draw. Me standing in front of a white background. and I can draw it really, really fast. Other times it's very, very complex, and I'm trying to draw it. Say it's like you're in high school and you're trying to draw a picture, and then your teacher says, turn in your homework, and you got to turn in halfway done. That is what causes tearing. So the computer is trying to draw something, but the TV has a fixed frame, and that fixed frame rate, and the TV says, you need to pass that. You need to turn in your homework right now. So the computer turns in the homework early, and it starts working on the next frame. And with tearing, it's like the picture is being drawn, and then it stops and starts drawing another one. So it's called tearing. And that's a problem. So now with variable refresh rate, the TV and the computer talk to each other, and if the computer can draw, or the game system can draw the frame really fast, the TV's refresh rate speeds up. If the computer needs more time to draw that frame, the TV's refresh rate slows down. So your frame rate is not fixed at 120 frames per second or 60 frames per second. It literally varies second by second based on this communication between the computer and the game system / graphics card. The next thing that could happen is what's called, we talked about that, quick frame transport. What is quick frame transport? The best way to think of quick frame transport is,
say that 10 times quickly.
I know, quick frame transport. I like my analogy. Say you're working on an assembly line and you're making a widget. You build a widget, and there's a conveyor belt going in front of you. And you build a widget, and you have to wait for the bucket to show up to put the widget in the bucket. So I build a widget, I put it in the bucket. The conveyor belt continues to go. I build the next widget, I put it in the bucket. But what happens if I could build that little thing faster before the next bucket shows up? I have to wait before I can put it in the bucket. So, and that's what's going on a lot of times with these game systems. They can draw the frame really, really, really quickly, but they have to wait for the next slot in the HDMI conveyor belt before they can send that signal off to the TV. With this, it's like now, instead of having buckets on the conveyor belt, it's just a conveyor belt. And as fast as I build the object, I can put it on the conveyor belt, and off it goes to the TV. So what does this mean as a gamer? You have a PlayStation 5. I have a PlayStation 5. My TV is equipped with quick frame transport. Your TV is not. Both computers can draw, both game systems draw the frame at the same time, but your computer has to wait for the next available time slot to send the picture off to the TV, while mine has already sent it to the TV. I see you before you see me, and you die in a first-person shooter game. So when you combine variable refresh rate, the ability to vary its refresh rate based on how fast the computer can draw the image, with the ability that as soon as that image is drawn, that video is sent off to the TV, you end up with a much, 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 much better gaming experience than what you already had. All right. So now I can speed up and slow down based on the computer. As soon as it's done, I can send it off. The problem is now your receiver and your TV has a lot of video enhancements and video processing that's on, and that can slow down the picture. So what they came up with is what's called auto low latency mode. And what auto low latency mode does is there's a game mode in all Denon and Marantz receivers. We've had it for how long? 3 years probably, but most people are unaware of that, because you have to manually go into the receiver and turn it on. Most TVs have a game mode, but you have to normally manually go into the TV and turn it on. Now it's done automatically. So I'm playing Netflix on my PlayStation. All of the video enhancements that I want on are on my TV and on my receiver. The second I switch from Netflix to playing a video game, the computer will tell the receiver to switch to game mode, and the receiver will tell the TV to switch the game mode. And it's all done automatically. So you get optimized video when you're watching video and optimized gaming when you're playing games. So all of this stuff is all about the advantage for a gamer. So I covered a lot right there, but
yeah.
But like I said, notice that we talked about all this stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that's in HDMI that's far beyond the 8K thing, and it drives me crazy when all anybody wants to talk about is 8K and 4K, when 90% of the stuff that's going to make your gaming experience better when you buy that PlayStation 5 or that new Xbox has absolutely nothing to do with 8K. It doesn't, and that's an important part.
Yeah, so, I think we covered some important points there. I'm sure there'll be questions in the chat window. We'll come back to that because we really need to be moving over to the audio side. Seeing as we're talking about AV receivers, we've covered video. So let's talk some.
Well, let's talk about audio real quick. So there are also some audio side or audio benefits or stuff that a theater guy would care about. There's 3 different levels of HDMI. There's different levels of HDR. So now instead of just having 2 flavors of dynamic HDR, Dolby Vision and HDR10, you also get another version which is called dynamic HDR. Best way to think of it, think of Dolby Vision as Coca-Cola, think of HDR10 Plus as Pepsi-Cola, and think of dynamic HDR as the white can with cola written across it, generic cola, okay? So you could do that. For the audio enthusiast, there's quick media switching. That one's pretty simple. A lot of times when you go from a video game, when you go from the menu system to the movie, you get a blank screen. Now that does not happen. You go right from the menu right to the movie, no blank screen. Pretty simple. The last one, the important one, is enhanced audio return channel, and this is important because of all of the different. A lot of times, there's a lot of great sources are built into your TV, but if you connect your TV using the fiber optic cable on your TV, it does not pass all of the different surround sound functionality. With ARC, which stands for Audio Return Channel, if I have Netflix, Amazon, Tidal, some sort of service built into my TV, it can pass the audio from that service back to my receiver in surround sound. If I have eARC, Enhanced Audio Return, it will pass surround sound, including DTS:X Pro, Dolby Atmos, or multi-channel uncompressed from my TV to my receiver. It's the same quality capability as if I physically had plugged the Blu-ray player into the back of the receiver. Supports 37 times more, eARC supports 37 times more bandwidth than just audio return channel. Way better than Toslink. So that is something that is part of 2.1 that is found on our receivers and every 2.1 TV.
Okay, so I think let's move on to immersive audio because we're talking about AV receivers. It's been the biggest thing to happen for a number of years is the introduction of DTS-X and Dolby Atmos. And it really has changed the way movies are produced. No longer are we talking about multi-channel, you're talking about object-based audio. And it really has changed the way that we listen to movies, but not only movies, but music as well. I don't know if anybody's been using Tidal recently, but the Dolby Atmos side of things there is really interesting experiment, because some tracks work really, really well, other tracks not so much.
And they'll learn.
Yeah, they will. So DTS-X Pro is a new feature that's on your products this year. Tell us what that is and why it's different.
Okay, so DTS, what happened before was Atmos had a larger amount of channels that you could utilize in a surround sound receiver. However, DTS was limited to 11 channels of audio, not because of the format or the content, but the processing capabilities and the licensing that DTS was offering consumer receivers and consumer products. Now, DTS can support up to with using DTS:X Pro can support up to 30.2 channels, 30.2 channels of surround. Now, the reason why this works and is both of these formats are object-based surround sound formats. So and what does that mean? Because as you add more channels to your system, you don't have to buy more new content. Normally, in the old way, when they used to mix stuff, they used to mix it in 5.1 or 7.1. Dolby Atmos DTS:X is not mixed that way. What they do is they make a bed layer that is 9.1, and that makes Dolby Atmos content and that DTS:X content backwards compatible. Because if you have an older receiver, it looks at just that basic 7.1 or 9.1 and uses that. Then what they do is they have a large amount of what they call objects that they can assign to sounds, and that object is applied by the object is given metadata. Where is it located? How big is it? And how diffuse is the sound? And then that metadata is provided in the signal. Then what happens is your receiver takes that information, the metadata, and its internal renderer in the receiver says, I'm going to take how many speakers do I have available to put that object in that spot. So that means because as I add more speakers, I just have more resources to put the object in a position. So DTS:X Pro does not require any new content. All the DTS:X content you have now that was playing back in 11 channels now has the capability, depending on how many channels your receiver has, can play back up to 30.2 channels. So it just gives you a level of expandability. Because how many versions of Star Trek do I have to buy? Now, because I have DTS:X content and Dolby Atmos content, I should be good until Phil gets his flying car, because I can continue to add speakers but the content will always just continue to get better. No new content is required for object-based stuff. So that is new. The 6700 will support it. The X8500, as well as the two Denons, the 8015 and the two Marantzes. The Marantzes are the AV 8805 and the SR 8015. The Denons are the 6700 and the X 8500, because they have the brain to support the processing that is required for this.
Philip, Philip, will that be out of the box, or is that with a firmware update?
It's coming via a firmware update. So there is a few things. If you look at it, the channel counts are different. Dolby Atmos has more possible surrounds, but DTS has more height capabilities, and also it has a center front height channel and a top surround channel, which is not available on Dolby Atmos. So different ways of approaching immersive sound technologies. And then on our receiver has the ability for you to switch between these configurations. It's going to ask you if you want to set up more of a DTS:X Pro configuration or a Dolby Atmos configuration during the time of setup.
Cool. I'll look forward to trying that out. I've got the X8500, so if it's a firmware update on that one, then spot on. I'll look forward to trying that out.
Yeah.
Now, we did mention Dolby Atmos music, so let's move over to. I know that Roger's a musician. Roger, have you listened to Dolby Atmos music yet through Tidal?
Not through Tidal yet. No, I've got to set up my Apple 4K TV device, I think, for getting that, which I will be doing. I've got one in my training kit, which I'll be setting up. The Dolby Atmos music stuff I've got is all on Blu-ray disc, right. Like Abbey Road remastered, that kind of thing. Yeah. And I like it. I think it brings a whole new thing. I think REM were one of the first bands to release some stuff.
Yeah, well, it's on Tidal. So if for those that don't know, if you've got an Apple 4K, and there's some other devices as well, but I know it works on the Apple, through a Tidal account if you get one. And I think Tidal's about £3 a month at the minute. They're running a special.
There are some ridiculous Tidal bargains at the moment. If
Yeah.
you want to just get stuck
Oh,
into
that's
that.
good.
And I've got to say, Steve has listened as well, because we've been talking about it. But some of the stuff on there, especially there's a Prince number, When Doves Cry. I heard that CES on a big system on Dolby Stand, and I was blown away by it at the time. And again, listening back at home, it's just the way they've mixed it, the way they've used the technology is absolutely fantastic. But then you get some other stuff that is just, well, they've hit a bit of a reverb on there and added a bit of space.
I really like Riders on the Storm.
Yes.
It's very effective.
Yeah.
A really good one is Kraftwerk. It's called 3D. It was already a really good Blu-ray. They just put that up there this weekend. So that's a good one that's been mixed in Dolby Atmos. It's available now.
Yeah, that had been that they'd done the donkey work on that for the disc release, and it benefits because it takes some of the thinking that they'd done for the minimum maximum tool, which was done in surround, and essentially they had an enormous sort of crib sheet of notes, which it naturally turns itself into an excellent live performance. I mean, to me, we had this discussion on another podcast. As a purist, the live stuff is where I find myself happiest with the construct of things like that being added. But you know, to each their own. If you want rain from your Riders on the Storm on the ceiling, who am I to blow against the wind?
Exactly. And like I said, you'll see other versions of it, you know, where they'll do multi-channel live. I mean, now they can put in live concert stuff, some of that Roger Waters wall stuff with the crowd cheering behind you and all that stuff. So
yeah, and you can, some of the recordings you can just bring out the ambience that was in the studio, like even some of the early just stereo jazz recordings, you know, there's all the ambience on the tape, and that's coming out in some of the Atmos stuff that I've heard.
Yeah. Well, don't forget, one of the most effective surround SACDs, remember those, was the Elvis #1s. All they did there was take the master tapes, play them on an enormous pair of stereo speakers, and record it on a 5-channel mic, and just record. All they recorded was the echo off the rear wall. And when you actually sat and listened to it, it was one of the very few occasions for me when multi-channel actually added something to the performance. It wasn't. There was no bells and whistles. It was simply the creation of space, and that was far more compelling than just randomly shoving one of the instrumentalists into the rear speakers because you can.
Yeah, it's all about the mastering and how carefully you treat the piece of music, right?
Yes,
absolutely. Yeah. Right, it's 10 past the hour. Folks, so just keep an eye on the clock, because we have a habit of going way long on these things. So we're going to come to your questions very soon. But before we do that, Ed, Steve, any questions at this point?
I've got 2 questions. So the first question is, how many channels do you actually process? I know that regardless of how many channels applications built into the receiver or amplifier, how many channels, what's the maximum number of channels you can process?
Okay. So currently our processor can support up to 13 channels. So originally it was 11. So now you have 13 channels. So that equates to, so think of it as you could do like a 7.2.6 or 9.2.4. And now that 7.2.6 can be done a couple of ways. With Dolby Atmos, you have your front heights, your middle heights, and your rear heights. That's one option. The other option is front heights and rear heights, plus a top front surround, a center front height and a top surround. So you have, and that center front height and top surround will be utilized for IMAX Enhanced, Aural 3D, and DTS-X Pro. Okay. Those can also, if you decide not to do the, go back to a more of an Atmos configuration, it can utilize that configuration as well. The only caveat is Dolby Atmos there cannot utilize the center front height or the top surround speaker. Okay. Phil said he had an 8500. The 8500 has 13 channels of amplification, 13 channels of processing, and 15 speaker terminals. So you could physically wire both of those combinations with the center heights, with the middle heights and the top surround and the center front height, and go into the amp configuration menu of the receiver and switch between those two configurations. That is one of the step ups of going from a 6700 to an 8500, that ability to switch between those two configurations. It takes a few seconds to do, but you have that firepower and that flexibility.
I think what we have to add here is to DTS X Pro, if you talk about it, that the new Neural X up mixer is working differently than the, let's say, old one with the same name, and actually is really activating all your installed speakers at any time. So it's really, let's say, pushing contents to every speaker you have installed. So it gets much more involved now.
Exactly.
Can you Neural X Atmos tracks, and can you Dolby Surround DTS X
That was
tracks?
the next one I wanted to tell you about. From last year, we had some issues with Dolby that they actually prohibited to upmix Dolby contents, and nobody was really happy about that one. So luckily, they had to withdraw their decision, and we now took the effort to get a firmware update for all the last year's AV receivers, so that you can utilize the upmixer, any upmixer on Dolby contents. And of course, that will also count for the new models we're going to add. And of course, also for the 8500 and the 8805, where we're going to have the firmware upgrade to support DTS X Pro as well. And they will also get the possibility then, or they already, let's say, they still have the possibility to upmix any Dolby content, and that will also continue then.
Yeah.
The nice thing is, in addition to that one, on the 8500 and 8805, we will also add the possibility to add front wide speakers now.
One final question. How exactly does DTS X IMAX Enhanced differ from normal DTS X?
Okay. So what ends up happening is, if you go to an IMAX theater, and I've done all the time, you go to a movie theater like a multi-screen cinema, you'll see a IMAX presentation available, a widescreen with DTS X presentation, and a Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision presentation. All three presentations are different. The reason why the IMAX presentation is different is, yes, there's some picture differences like aspect ratios and things like that. But number one, the speakers in an Atmos in an IMAX theater are full range. They're like 9 feet tall. They're full range. There's no LFE in an IMAX channel. It's 12.0. It has basically, you can have a total of it has a center height as one of their modes of one of their a center front height channel. That is native to IMAX. That is not native to any other format. You have a center channel and a center front height channel. So the mix is different. How it's mixed is different. It's mixed with a lot more dynamics. There's a lot less digital compression done to it, or dynamic compression done to it, because of the size of the speakers. Whenever you do DTS X material for your home, they mix that for the Blu-ray release as a near field mix, because they're trying not to hurt the person's sound bar or hurt the person's small bookshelf speakers. The IMAX mix is still the full dynamic cinematic release with more dynamic, with very little dynamic compression on it. They also have to, because the amount of bass that they drive in each channel, because there is no LFE, every speaker has its own subwoofer. The mix is a little bit different. So just like if I take the a DTS X mix and an IMAX mix of the same movie, the experience is different, because the mix is different, and how that mix is put on the disc is different. So you will hear a difference between the two. DTS X is just utilized as the backbone of that the IMAX enhanced information is layered on top of. So it is a totally different mix.
Okay. Any questions from you, Ed?
A related one. I don't know. Awkwardly, I don't know exactly how much can be revealed at this point. One of the most interesting products I've tested this year is from you gentlemen. It's been the Marantz NR 1200. In the fullness of time, these one hopefully it's been sufficiently successful that they're going to keep building. You're going to keep building such a thing. Will this eventually see a similar level of sort of HDMI functionality as the receivers are currently getting?
So that's for the 1200. Oliver, you want to tackle that one?
I can do, sure. So yeah, first of all, Ed, I have to agree. It's a fantastic product. Yes, two-channel receiver with all the capabilities of having HDMI switching, just fantastic. We will continue, of course, that one. I can't tell you right now if we're really going to add 8K in the near future to this product, because actually the target customer we have for this type of product,
will be different. I appreciate
it is different. Yes, so there will at one point of time surely will be also upgraded to 8K, but I don't see it coming next year. Yeah. No,
that's fair enough. But it's more heartening to hear that that you guys feel that it's been, commercially worth doing, because I mean it's always interesting when something, it's a relatively new idea. So I'm pleased to see that it has sort of customer traction, and it's nice to see that it's still on the roadmap, and that as and when it becomes more of a mainstream requirement to have this, that it's on the sort of list of things to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's let's say it's a nice step up from a soundbar. Yeah, if you have your living room set up for both watching TV and listening to music, you can combine both.
Yeah, and you can choose the speakers that you want to use with it.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to come on to your questions now in the chat window. So if you have been typing away, thank you very much for that. People are now going to quickly look through and pick out some questions to answer. And while they do that, obviously this is a one-off podcast that we're trying out for the first time. If you have enjoyed what we're doing this evening and you want to see more of these podcasts during the week, then why not hit that like button on the video, please? I can see there's lots of you watching at the moment. It does help the video. It helps the video get found on YouTube, and it pushes it up the recommended charts and so on. So it does help us. It brings more people in, and it shows us that you actually do appreciate what we're doing this evening. Also, if you want to support us, you do have the Patreon, which is patreon.com/AV Forums. That's a long-term subscription. If you want it to be, it's £3 per month. And if you go up there and sign up, that would be appreciated. And also you can make up a one-time donation, streamlabs.com/AV Forums. And that's usually the perfect way to get your question asked live by the team while we're here. And don't forget that we're also around once this podcast finishes tonight. You can find it on YouTube. You can also find the audio version on Spotify and iTunes and other podcast providers. If you have a question you weren't able to be here on the live show, you can still ask that question. Send it through to podcast@avforums.com, and we will get round to having those questions answered, and we'll pick the best ones and so on. So the guys have had time to have a look through the questions. So
one that stood out. I feel sorry for History Amazing. He keeps asking to say, please answer my question. Please answer my question. So he's asking about the receiver has what's called dual speaker preset, which means I can actually save two different amplifier Odyssey surround sound configurations and switch between the two. And one of the things you can do with that is, say I have preamp mode, I could take my theater and I can run my theater using outboard amplification. And then I can take the other preset and say and set that for the speakers to play, the amplifiers to be used, and send it out to a second zone. What he's asking about is I can tell take the amplifiers and send that out to a second zone, but what do I do with the bass? So what you would have to do with the bass is when I set that preset number 2 to use the internal amplifiers for the second room, you would go in and set your main speakers to, you would have to probably set your main speakers to large, and then run the wires through the subwoofer up to the speakers so the subwoofer can get signal. That's probably the easiest way to do it if you wanted to utilize that type of configuration, if you wanted subwoofers in that second room. So main room would be RCA, second room would be what is it, speaker level, is how you would have to do the subs for that second space. So hopefully that'll help Amazing, because he was asking about that forever.
10 times.
But I will tell you that is a question I hadn't thought about the sub outs. And if I come up with a more elegant solution for that sending that sub out from place to place, I will make sure that I share it with this group.
Okay, well, hopefully that's answered your question. History amazing.
Please stop now.
Usually it's usually Ken. I haven't seen any questions from Ken yet. So
no, he's got a question, as I can see. He says, I gave my questions earlier on as well. Don't know what they are.
It's a running joke for you.
Right, I'll tell you what. Someone else look at a question they want answering, because it's not going to be me answering any questions. I will locate these and I'll get them into the chat box for people. Okay. So if someone else wants to, someone who can actually answer questions, pick something they want, and I'll crack on finding things for people.
I'm going to ask a difficult one. It's come up a couple of times, and it's one that has been asked on the forums a few times. And now that we've got you guys here, I think it's an important one to ask. You use Odyssey at the moment for your room EQ. A lot of people asking, will you use Direct Live at any point? Is that something that you're looking at?
I'll be looking into many different things, of course. Always keeping in mind the customer experience or the user experience, because if you look to Direct Live, yes, it's a very professional tool. However, it's not really for the normal consumer to use easily, because you have always to use your laptop to get the calibration done. So with Odyssey, it's much more user-friendly approach. It does cover everything. If you want to go more into details, you can use the Odyssey app to even go under the hood and do all your fine adjustment as well. So we have a lot of flexibility with Odyssey and the ease of use. But of course, we're also looking into Direct Live for next generation flagship. That could be something which can be implemented.
Yeah, and a lot of times what ends up happening is the main thing that they want the Direct Live for, like I said, is more flexibility. The app costs $20 US for your iPhone or for an Android device or an Apple device. The amount of flexibility and capabilities that you now unlock in your receiver for adjustments is amazing. So I actually did a whole thing with Odyssey a couple of weeks ago about Odyssey and the application, and the things you can do with it is really, really good, especially when you combine it with the dual speaker preset. So you can have for example, a calibration. In my room, I have a calibration for my curtains open and my 75-inch TV. And then I have a separate calibration and tuning for my projection screen down and my blackout curtains closed. I can determine what range of frequencies I want the Odyssey to adjust. I can make modified EQ curves. There's a million different things you can do with it. So if you're looking for more flexibility from Odyssey, get the app. It's worth the $20. And the performance makes a big difference in what you can do with it.
And Phil, you did a two-way chat, didn't you, with the software engineer from Odyssey?
Yeah.
On your YouTube channel, Sound United Training. If people search for Sound United YouTube training channel, they'll find a couple of talks with you and Odyssey.
Yeah. And DTS. So if you really want to tackle DTS, So
and if you want to go another step deeper into HDMI 2.1, you find it there as well.
even more in depth.
Believe me, we touched just a tiny bit of it. But we figured that our goal is to try to provide you with information, because the more informed everybody is, the more they understand why manufacturers do what they do and what they really need to actually get great sound.
Excellent. I've actually got the link for that, so I'll shove that into the chat right now so people can find that video. Right. Any more questions?
There's actually quite an interesting one. I think this is, as someone who does video through very thick glasses, this is of some interest to me. Is there any interest, future models from either Marantz Official or Denon UK, for XLR outputs for subwoofers, so I can connect my subs via XLR instead of RCA? It's about grounding and playing about with specific, Phil, to the UK. Often when we get some of the US pattern subwoofers in, designed around US mains wiring, because our mains wiring is different, it's one of the easiest ways of stopping them humming. So it's something that it's more than just I want to put my subwoofer 80 feet away. It can actually have some some benefits to the ability to actually just suppress noise on certain designs for grounding.
It's all about that's a good question. I mean, I could see the benefit of it, but it all depends on how much real estate, engineering resources, all that stuff. Because if you look at the back of one of these AVRs, there's not a lot of room. And the second you start talking XLR inputs, that's some more circuitry in the box and some more and some more real estate on the back. So, but I could totally see why. Like I said, I love my AV 805 because I have that flexibility. And that's one of the reasons why people would normally step up. That's why we encourage people to start with preamp mode, buy amplifiers, and now when it's time to get a new processor, now you can switch from a receiver to a physical preamp. So that's one of the benefits of preamp mode this year, is it allows you to build up to the point where you can go to a preamp that's all XLRs.
Absolutely.
Grumpy Capybara, he said, is there any tech on the horizon that isn't general knowledge yet? There is. We can't talk about it.
Because it's not general knowledge yet.
I can't tell you what, I can't tell you when, right?
Yeah. Right, I'm just trying to find some more. Any others there, guys? I think we've covered them all, actually.
In the context of Marantz and Denon.
Tons of video. There's always tons of video. Every time I come, you'll be amazed that every time I go to a hi-fi thing, I get pounded with video questions.
There is one question from Ken. I found Ken's question. Is there any chance of either a Denon or Marantz receiver or processor doing 15 channels of processing? So you can do 9.1.6 or 9.2.6.
Believe me, I think that they're looking at ways to increase the channel count, because not only does Sound United we are a very big, very pop big when it comes to AVRs. We have some skin in the game when it comes to speakers too. So I'm sure that they're looking at that. But now the nice thing is you can utilize, if we do go that way, you can utilize it for not only Dolby Atmos, but also DTS:X and IMAX Enhanced. And before, if I added that additional channel count, it was only for one format. Now it's pretty much for every format, which is actually a benefit and makes it more likely.
Phil, you might be able to answer this question, because I've got 9.1.6. And
sure.
But on some movies, I can definitely hear stuff coming from the width channels, and on some there doesn't seem to be anything coming out of the width channels. Is that specific to the Atmos? Is it? I'm specific. We're talking about Atmos here. Atmos soundtrack. Yeah, are some studios doing more than others?
Yeah, because just like anything, we were talking about Dolby Atmos music, and sometimes they get carried away, and sometimes they don't. Many mixers right now are still more comfortable with a traditional 7.1, 9.1 world. And they're starting to apply more and more objects to the mix. And if the original mixing engineer isn't doing very much height stuff and height objects, sometimes it's not much there. As they get better and they get more comfortable with the mixes. I mean, there's some movies like John Wick, and another good one is, what's the new Zombieland, the new Zombieland movie? Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. They're getting better with utilizing objects, and they're getting more and more comfortable with it. It's like it's a new tool for these engineers and these directors, and they just have to get used to utilizing it, and they'll just start utilizing it more. They can put up to over 110 objects whizzing around the room simultaneously, but I don't think they'll ever do that because, oh my God, can you imagine what that would be like? But they will start adding more and more objects as time go on because they get more comfortable with it. But hopefully they do it tastefully, right?
Yeah, it's all about being creative, because I've heard some soundtracks where it suddenly takes you out of the movie, and that is not the point. The point is that you don't actually realize what's going on. It's done subtly, it's done to artistic effect, and not just because they can put an explosion. And I once watched a video, it's still on YouTube, it might even be on Vimeo, with a sound engineer talking about that, and he actually did two different mixes. He did the mix as he would do it, and it was a shootout, and then he did a mix as somebody out of the business, not in the business, would imagine it was done, and they sound completely different, because one's just a garbled mess, because everything's making a sound in the scene, whereas if you actually study a scene, not everything that's moving or hitting a wall or whatever actually makes a sound. It's only certain sounds that they actually use, so it doesn't become a garbled mess, and it's really quite an interesting science, really. Same as video. Interesting when you get stuck into it. So is there anything, gentlemen, that we haven't raised this evening that you would like to cover before we finish? Because we are now starting to run a little bit over time. So anything that we haven't covered tonight?
Well, like I'm trying to figure. Ask Oliver. Can you think of anything?
To be honest with you, I think we've covered everything.
We've done pretty much everything except world peace. So I think
exactly.
I think so. So if you have enjoyed this evening's podcast, like I say, it's the first time we've done one during the week. It's the first time we've done one with guests from the industry. If you've enjoyed it, then please hit that like button. Let us know that you have liked the video. Give us your feedback as well. We're always interested to hear what your thoughts are, whether you're watching live or watching later in the week, or even listening while taking the dog for a walk. Let us know what you think about the podcast this evening, if you'd like us to do more versions of this kind of thing. And my thanks again to the guys from Denon and Marantz joining us this evening. So my thanks to Philip Jones. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
Oliver, thank you very much.
Thanks for the invitation. It was nice.
And Roger, always good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, Phil. Thanks for having us.
All right. And also have to thank Steve and Ed as well. Thank you very much, guys. We'll be back on Sunday night for our usual podcast. Remember to join us there. And if you have enjoyed the podcast, then please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you are told when we publish new videos. And there are some review videos coming up this week as well before the next podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. You can bookmark avforums.com for latest reviews, news, and video. Plus, why not leave us a rating on iTunes, but only if you enjoyed the show. Thank you very much for listening and watching. I'm Phil Hinton. We'll see you again on Sunday night.